What is going on, everyone? It's Justin here, and today I've got a video talking about kind of the behind the scenes process as well as some of the things that I learned in shooting my very first car commercial, and that was the Porsche Taycan. So we did this about a month ago, and we were working with a dealership to produce promotional content of this brand new car and essentially had all creative direction in terms of what we wanted to do with it. So just as a bit of a background, I make YouTube videos, but I don't have any experience in the film industry or commercial video. I've just been making videos for the last decade, and over the years have gotten more familiar with like camera equipment, editing techniques, and of course we film a lot of products like phones and laptops and stuff, but a car is definitely something that is very new to me. So when the opportunity came to be able to film a Taycan, I was obviously very excited, but there's a lot of things to kind of prepare for and learn, and in this video I'm going to talk a bit about like the process, the behind the scenes, and also some of the things that I learned and some tips and tricks of doing a car commercial. So for this video, I did work with my friend Keaton Harega as well as Chris Clark. Keaton is someone who has done car commercials in the past in Vancouver for Toyota, Lexus. We were on the same Lincoln trip. And my friend Chris Clark is a cinematographer and director of photography as well as director, who has also worked on some projects with Mercedes as well as a music video with Equali and Illenium. So in terms of this video, the very first step is trying to find a location and also like a vision of what you want to do for the video. And being my first car commercial, I decided that I wanted to kind of go with a broad approach that captured both like the beauty and detail of this vehicle, but also the futuristic technology of the electric car by Porsche. So the kind of theme with it was to have like the car parked and at the end of the day have it like charging and also resting up, but at the same time showcase the speed and capabilities in the outdoors. And also last but not least, some B-roll of like the macros and details of the car in its beauty with just nothing else around it except for its small details. So in terms of location, this was based in Vancouver, and we decided to take the car out to Chilliwack because it was going to be much quieter. You'd have long stretches to be able to drive the car and also get a few takes and be able to go back and forth without being in the middle of the road and causing any danger to like the general public. But of course, one thing you have to consider with an electric car is the range, and the distance that we were driving was about 130 kilometers each way, and the total range of the car was just under 400. So we had to factor in like the charging stations, how far we were gonna go, how much we were gonna drive it, and also kind of just ration out the battery to ensure it doesn't run out at any point, and also not have to stop in the middle of day to wait for it to charge, which is like valuable daylight and filming time. So from the equipment standpoint, the following is what we used. The main camera was a Red Dragon X, which you're watching this video on right now. This is like my main camera for about a couple months now. I absolutely love it, and for what we use it on for YouTube, it really doesn't take advantage of it to the max, but with the level of dynamic range, which is above 16.5 stops, doing cars and details and everything just looks so nice, and with Red Raw, we were able to obviously do a lot with the color grading in post, which I'm going to talk about later in this video. I'm also going to spend some time talking about like the editing workflow and kind of what I did in terms of color grading as well. In terms of lenses, it really did vary. We used the 24-70 f4 with stabilization. We also use a 16-35, but of course also use some of the lenses with lower f-stops to be able to get right up close, and especially in the dark themed. But also one of the most important things to consider with cars and a moving subject is stabilization, and with that we use the Easy Rig, but if I were to do this over again, I would have rented a Movi Pro to stabilize the red properly. A lot of times though, shooting with slow motion allows you to kind of get away with it here and there depending on the specific shot. Because we were shooting outdoors, we also needed a matte box which allowed it to block some flares, but also easily add like ND filters and different filters to slide in and out and just use it with different lenses. So the one I had is from Polar Pro. In terms of lighting, I brought over the Aperture 120D. I could have used maybe a more powerful light, but in terms of what it was and its size, it was able to get the job done on top of the softbox. For some of like the macro shots and like the tighter situations, a very handy accessory that I also brought along was the Nanlite Pavo tubes, which are LED lights that can use the entire RGB range as well as different Kelvin balances, and for like inside the car and also lighting it underneath and also getting some like movements and cinematics, this is a tool that is very handy. As for a more portable and secondary setup, we also had the Blackmagic 6K camera that is able to shoot 6K RAW and has pretty good dynamic range as well, and that was operated on a DJI Ronin M. So beginning with the outdoor shots, this is probably the most difficult. You have a lot of factors to worry about, including the car getting dirty, as well as like the weather and whether it's raining in a certain area, if you have like traffic and stuff. So I think knowing your location and scouting it out beforehand is going to be very important. And even if you spend like just a full day doing that, I think in terms of the shoot, it ended up going very smoothly because we had locations in mind already. So for the main portions of the car, the biggest difficulty was obviously trying to track the car and also ensure that it was very stabilized. There's a few ways to do this, including hanging your gimbal outside of the car, which you want to make sure you're secured, either having it shoot through the back window if there's like a latch, or also renting a Russian arm, which is going to cost you an arm and a leg, but can get you amazing results. Originally, we did try to use the Red 6K like hooked up to a system, but what ended up being much easier was to actually use the Blackmagic 6K, which is much smaller and was also compatible on the Ronin M gimbal. In some cases, if you don't have like a proper stabilizer and stuff, then shooting in slow motion is going to be a huge advantage for usable footage. In most cases, if you're using a cinema camera, it is going to be in manual focus, but if you're using something like the Canon 1DX or the Sony, then by tracking the focus, it should do a very good job because it is nearly impossible to be able to manually focus by hand unless you have a focus puller while the car is moving. For like photos and stuff though, we also had the Canon 1DX3, which was also really useful because of its fast speed, and being able to stick it out of the car and take some photos worked very well. And in terms of like casual Instagram photos, I also used the Fuji X100V, and my friend Chris also brought out a Hasselblad vintage camera to get some crazy film shots. One very important accessory in this shoot though is a Pro Mist filter, and that was recommended from my friend Chris Clark, so I'm gonna let him talk a little bit about some of the tips that he has, as well as the benefits of a Pro Mist filter.
On this shoot, we're using a black Pro Mist, which basically lowers the overall contrast of the image, but keeps the blacks dark. Pro Mist filters come in all different strengths. I think they start at an eighth, go to a quarter, half, 1, 2, 3, and I only really use the quarter and the eighth. We're just looking to lower the contrast and make the highlights bloom and make the headlights a little more pleasing, and just creates an overall nicer, less digital looking image.
That is something that is going to be extremely useful for anyone trying to shoot cinematic video, not only cars and like products, but also like films as well. I think this kind of goes without saying, but if you're shooting outside and you might have limited lighting, or you have a limited window of time where there's like no other cars or other things in frame, then having a shot list in mind and being able to reference that, such as like the sunset shot right here at a boat dock, is going to be very important in trying to nail your shot while the conditions are perfect. And in this case, the sunset looked amazing. So in terms of some of the interior and garage shots, this is definitely something that I'm a little bit more familiar with because most of the footage that I shoot is indoors. But I would say the biggest challenge is being able to know where your power outlets are, to set up your lighting, make sure everything is plugged in, but also stabilization. That is always going to be something that is going to be a bit more difficult with cinema cameras. But in our case, the Easy Rig was kind of the stabilization of choice. Obviously tripods were there and available, but a lot of times a tripod just gets like a very stable and fixed look that just doesn't look as cinematic. But at the same time, shaky footage sucks, so I try to shoot in slow motion as much as possible because it does allow you to not have to rely as much on editing-based stabilization such as warp stabilizer, which obviously can work very well, but isn't always a solution. So for some of the clips here where we're just really trying to focus on a stable object such as the headlights, we would shoot it in 60 frames per second and up, and most cameras can shoot in 60 frames in 4K, but in this case, the Red is able to shoot 6K at, I believe, 71 frames. For a shot like this, because we were shooting in slow motion, we were able to use like a 24-35 Sigma lens that can go all the way down to f2, and because we were slowing it down, this lens doesn't have stabilization, but it didn't matter as much. Using something like an Easy Rig really takes all the weight off the body, and of course you're not going to need this with every camera, but in this case, the Red really benefited from the Easy Rig because I was able to just really direct the shot and get the angles, and also be able to run around and be very versatile with it, but at the same time ensure the footage was going to be more stable than if I used my hands. In terms of the way we set up the lighting, what I usually like to do is get to the set and just have everything pitch black. We'll park the car and set it up, but the very first light is the one that we set up as a key light, and that was the Aperture 120D. I brought the smallest dome that I had because everything had to fit in the Taycan as well, and it was enough light, but it could have been more, so if I was to do it over again, I would bring the 300D as well as a larger dome. In terms of lighting the rest of the car though, because we only had one main light, having a pavo tube was very, very handy. I'm sure you guys have seen a ton of YouTubers use this for many different reasons, whether it is like a nice background, but it actually does much more than that. So you can go ahead and turn it on right here, and yeah, it's white. I'm sure you guys have seen like a white light before, but it's almost like a lightsaber when you play around with it, but it has so many settings and the options are literally limitless. So as you guys can see here, I can control the brightness. I can also control the color temperature from different shades, whether it is a warmer or cooler tone, but we were also using it in RGB modes as well to be able to switch it between different colors and get like a cool effect. So for example, the interior of the car is red, so we were able to kind of play around with that. As you guys can see, I'm just like shuffling it around here. But in terms of getting a cool effect and making the car look like it was lit up from underneath, we would just slide these underneath the car, set it to the same color balance as the aperture light, and from there was able to get like a very cool effect. And for the price, I think these are an amazing value. The battery life also does last like 2 hours on its own, so you can go ahead and just charge it up and not have to ensure that it is wired everywhere. And when you're filming in like a large open space, then that is a lifesaver. So in terms of lighting, after having this light right here, as well as the nan lights on the inside of the car, we were just filming back and forth, different angles, getting the screen, and ensuring that we're not filming the same side every single time, because that is definitely something that is easy to get carried away by. When it comes to editing the footage, you always want to have as many options as possible, and you just don't want to have every shot go from left to right over and over again. You want to make sure you're doing shots where you're holding it steady, you're panning in and out, maybe from top down, and then obviously some that are just the standard left to right. Of course, in the outside, drone footage is also extremely important, so my friend Keaton is going to talk about like kind of some tips and tricks that he has for both taking photos of cars and the settings that you should use, as well as flying a drone and trying to track a car. I'm personally never good at drones, but Keaton is a licensed drone pilot.
Hey guys, my name is Keaton and I'm a filmmaker and photographer from Chilliwack, BC. Recently I had the pleasure of helping Justin on the Porsche Taycan shoot. So today I'm going to go through a bit of gear that I use when I'm shooting cars, and then some tips on how to shoot better car photos. So I'll go into the camera settings I use when shooting roller photos, and the key thing when you're shooting roller photos is your shutter speed. That's how you get the background blurry. So I set my shutter to 1/25th of a second. And some people will do it at like 1/20th, or 1/30th, a little slower, faster, but I find 1/25th works for me. Then I set my shutter, or my ISO, to 100, and then I'll correct the exposure just using my aperture. Usually I'll have to crank it up depending on the lighting that day. But yeah, so I'll just set my shutter to 1/25th and then my ISO to 100, and then I'll adjust my aperture accordingly to get the right exposure. So back to roller photos, another key setting is to use burst mode when shooting roller photos. But yeah, so those are the camera settings when shooting roller photos. Now I'll go into a bit of actually shooting the photos. So you're gonna need at least 2 other people and a second car. So one will be the camera car and then the car that you're actually shooting. So you're gonna have to have someone driving the camera car and then driving the car that you're shooting, and then you will be shooting out of the actual camera car. And a key tip when shooting roller photos, when you're driving both cars, is the cars have to be going the exact same speed for it to work, to be able to get the car in focus. It won't work if cars are going different speeds, so make sure you match your speeds. And a good tip for that, I would definitely recommend if you're gonna be shooting lots of cars, is picking up walkie-talkies. I probably wouldn't be able to do car shoots without walkie-talkies, honestly. They're the best investment I've probably gotten for that. And
so in terms of some of the in-the-car shots, there was a few different options, and the big conflict is often how do you mount this in the car. And when you're borrowing a car, especially one that is worth $200,000, not having much experience in mounting a camera onto a car was something that I just didn't want to go to. I didn't want to put the car at risk in any way. So instead of thinking of mounting the Red on the outside and miking it up, we decided to go ahead and go handheld on the Canon 1DX3, paired with a 16-35 lens and using face and eye tracking to track the subject. So essentially my friend Chris was in the car, sitting in the passenger side and holding it up against the dashboard. And because we were using the 16-35 f4 lens, that lens does have stabilization, which is a huge difference. So even though it is very nice to get some background separation, at f4 we were able to ensure that the face was always going to be in focus, but at the same time shooting in C-Log was a huge advantage in ensuring that the windows were not too blown out. In terms of the audio setup though, we also have the Mix Pre, which is what I use for most of my audio, plugging in and syncing it externally, but another very useful tool was using something called a Beach Tech with the Red. This is an audio preamp that is specialized for the Red, and you're able to mount it to the side of your camera, plug the audio right into the line in, in on the I/O port, and you're able to connect XLR to 2 ports and also set some of the custom settings. That includes gain, the high pass and low pass filter, even supplying phantom power. So in terms of like doing audio for the lav mic, we just went ahead and hooked up the Sennheiser AVX to the Beach Tech, and from there we're able to get very high quality audio that is automatically synced to the footage. I think for any Red owner that doesn't want to spend $4,000 on the accessory pack that they have on the back of the camera, this is an amazing value. So now that the filming's all done, make sure you back up all your footage. And when it comes to editing, I'm used to editing like very simply. I wouldn't say I'm like the best editor by any means, but in terms of how we decided to do the edit, we did a few different versions, including an indoor, an outdoor, as well as a combined storyline, and of course the YouTube videos that you guys saw as well. With like a car commercial and stuff, you'll notice that the editing is actually very simple. You let the car speak for itself. You don't put any crazy animations in there. So for the most part, it was just trying to perfect the workflow as opposed to having to learn like new software. I am trying to learn DaVinci Resolve right now, but I used Final Cut Pro 10 to edit this entire video. And after having hundreds and terabytes of clips that is all over the computer after a few days of shooting, which is kind of the approach to just film as much as possible, then you have to kind of pick the shots that are either just not usable at all or aren't as good, and pick out the ones and kind of separate them, and that can take a lot of time. What I like to do after that though is I'll take the clips that are usable and lay them out in the timeline, and a lot of times I know a lot of people like to do grading last, but in my case I like to just grade the footage first and just get a feel for some of the colors and the footage that we're dealing with, and after I see like the graded clip, assuming we did a good job, then I get more excited to edit the entire video. I think with color grading as well, you really want to sleep on it, and a lot of times you might have a certain grading approach on a certain day, but the next day you might wake up and look at it and want to make some changes. So if you're planning to spend like 1 to 2 weeks to edit the video, then to really perfect that, you kind of want to just sleep on it here and there and build a constant evolution towards the final look. So after all the footage has been laid out, in my case, I still had like 20 to 30 minutes of footage, and we need to get that down to like 1 to 2 minutes for a car commercial, typically around 30 seconds to a minute. So you just start to slim down every single clip as much as you can, and also marking the ones that you feel like are very important to tell the story. After that, you take a look at the movements and ensure that you don't have 2 consecutive movements with each other. And I kind of just like trimmed it down and ensure that everything kind of fit on theme, both in terms of the colors and the setting. In terms of the color grading, I went ahead and used 2 different LUTs for this, an outdoor one as well as an indoor one. And for the indoor ones, we went with a bit of a cool tone just to really highlight the headlights and the white look, and really give it like a moody look. And in terms of the car's interior, we wanted to highlight the red. And when it came to the outdoors, I didn't want to crush the greens or anything, but instead give it kind of a vibe to tell the story of the car and how it's a great weekend vehicle to enjoy. Of course, we also can't forget about music. That is a huge part of any video, and especially with a car video, I think it really does set the tone. And the suggestion is to find the music before you go ahead and film, but in our case, we didn't really do that, but we kind of had in mind what kind of speed and theme we were going with. So I just went on Music Bed, got 3 different songs, and built 3 different versions of the commercials, and just really tried to time and stretch the clips accordingly to fit within a target length. I think once you have all your clips together that are shortened and eliminated, it makes it much easier to match to music. And the very last step is adding sound effects, and that is such as like the car sound, some of the clicks, and little things that just make a huge difference. The very last step though before exporting is to denoise and stabilize the footage, because this stuff really kills your computer, and even using a $15,000 computer like the Mac Pro, that stuff really does tax the computer and makes it a horrible experience to edit everything else at the same time while doing that. So the very last step is to apply stabilization, and in my case, I used 2 different types, including the Better Stabilizer from FX Factory Pro as well as Lock and Load, and you just really have to experiment to figure out which one is best for the clip. So I think that pretty much covers some of the basics in terms of how we edited the video and the structure and the workflow behind that. Obviously I could go like hours and hours, and I do need to get better at grading and using like DaVinci and stuff, but other than that, I feel like I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out as my first car video. If you guys enjoy a video like this, though, I don't normally do these like long behind the scenes, but I just love the way it turned out, and I really appreciate all the support on that episode. But if you guys want to see more of it, make sure you leave a comment down below and leave a like, and I'll see you all in the next video.